I want you to picture a specific moment in time. It's July 9th, 2011. You're in Juba. The streets are just absolutely packed. There are flags, people dancing, crying tears of joy. This is the birth of South Sudan.
The world's youngest nation.
Exactly. And the energy is electric because this wasn't just, a political handover. This was the finish line of a marathon that lasted 50 years.
Generations.
Generations of people fought for this, bled for this. The whole narrative was, we are finally free. We have our own land, our own oil, our own destiny.
It was a moment of immense, almost blinding hope. I remember watching the coverage, and it felt like the impossible had actually happened.
And then snap your fingers.
Yeah.
Fast forward just 2 years, December 2013.
Yeah.
That dream doesn't just fade, it violently implodes. You have civil war, mass displacement, economic collapse. I mean, the country basically sets itself on fire.
It is one of the most devastating trajectories in modern history. And the question everyone asks, from UN diplomats to, the guy reading the news, is just why? How does a dream deferred for so long turn into a nightmare so quickly?
That is the paradox we are grappling with today. Usually when we talk about South Sudan, we talk about the symptoms, right? The ethnic clashes, oil prices, peace treaties that don't stick. But today, we're going underneath all of that. We are doing a deep dive into what feels like a diagnostic report of the country's soul.
We are. We're looking at a seminal piece of work by Dr. Adok Nyaba, and for those who don't know the name, he's not some armchair analyst in London or Washington.
No, he's an insider.
A total insider, a South Sudanese academic, a politician, a former minister of higher education.
He was in the trenches, literally and metaphorically. And the work we're unpacking has a title that, it just grabs you by the throat. It's called The Deformation of Political Thought and the Failure of Nation Formation in South Sudan.
It's a heavy title, but every single word is deliberate.
Wow. He's not calling it growing pains. He's not calling it challenges. He uses the word deformation. It suggests a birth defect, something that went wrong while the baby was still in the womb.
Exactly. And that is our mission for this deep dive. We're investigating Nyaba's central thesis, that the violence and the collapse, they aren't the cause of the failure.
They're the result.
They are the result of a specific psychological rot, a warped political thinking that infected the liberation movement long before they ever raised that flag in 2011.
So Dr. Nyaba is basically saying the foundation of the house was cracked before they even started pouring the concrete for the walls.
Precisely. And to find that crack, Nyaba takes us way back. We have to look at the liberators, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, the SPLM and its army, the SPLA.
Okay, hold on. When most of us think of a liberation army, we have a very specific movie playing in our heads, right?
The Les Miserables version of revolution.
Right. Do you the people sing? We picture these stoic, disciplined soldiers united by a high-minded ideology, reading political theory by the campfire.
Fighting for the abstract concept of the nation.
But Nyaba takes a sledgehammer to that image. This is his first massive aha moment in the analysis.
He argues that this romantic image masked a very messy, very transactional reality. He points out that for a huge number of recruits, the actual guys holding the AK-47s in the Bush national consciousness wasn't the driver at all.
They weren't fighting for South Sudan as a political entity.
No.
So if they weren't fighting for the country, what were they fighting for?
Survival, revenge, and assets. Nyaba details how the recruitment process actually worked. Many young men joined the army specifically to acquire weapons.
And why did they need weapons?
To settle local scores. Maybe a neighboring tribe stole their cattle last year.
Okay, so I join the army, I get a gun, and now I have the means to go get my cows back.
Exactly, or to defend your specific village from the guys over the hill. Nyaba argues that for many, the horizon of their struggle didn't extend past their own ethnic territory.
So you have a national army that's actually just a loose collection of local militias, each looking out for number one.
In many ways, yes. And here is where the systemic failure comes in. In a successful revolutionary movement, if you look at history, like, say, the ANC in South Africa, you usually have political commissars.
The people responsible for the software of the army.
Right. Their job is to teach the soldiers why they're fighting. Take a person who thinks locally and give them a national identity to say, we aren't fighting the village next door, we're fighting a systemic oppressor.
And Nyaba says the SPLM didn't do this.
He argues they failed catastrophically at it. They integrated these men into the army without correcting their intentions. They handed out sophisticated weaponry but didn't hand out a new mindset.
That is a terrifying thought. It's like handing a machine gun to someone who's still operating on a vendetta based on cattle raiding.
You aren't building a national defense force.
You're just weaponizing tribal grievances.
And locking those fractures in place. So instead of the army acting as a melting pot where everyone becomes South Sudanese, the movement actually solidified ethnic loyalties. The primary driver remained ethnic bonds.
Which explains everything that happened later. As soon as the common enemy Khartoum, the North, was gone, the glue just dissolved.
The deformation was there from the start. You didn't have a national army ready to defend a new state. You had armed ethnic factions who just happened to be wearing the same uniform for a while.
Okay, so that explains the military instability. The foundation is cracked. But Nyaba's analysis goes beyond just the guys with guns. He talks about what happened when these leaders took off their fatigues and put on suits. Because the hope in 2011 was, okay, now we can focus on development, building schools, roads, hospitals.
One would hope. But Nyaba argues that instead of a nation-building class, a different kind of class emerged. And he introduces a term here that is absolutely crucial. He calls it parasitic capitalism.
Parasitic capitalism. That is a visceral phrase. It sounds incredibly predatory. Unpack that for us.
It describes a system where the ruling class doesn't generate wealth through production. In a normal economy, you get rich by, building a factory, growing crops, creating a service, you produce something.
But in South Sudan?
In South Sudan, the ruling class generates wealth by sucking it directly out of the state. Yala described his coalition of military leaders and merchants engaged in the primitive accumulation of wealth.
Primitive accumulation. That's a bit academic. What does that actually mean for the listener who skipped Econ 101?
In this context, it basically means looting. It's the initial grabbing of resources by force or by just being close to power. It's state capture. They treated the national treasury not as a public fund,
but as a spoil of war.
A spoil of war to be divided up right now.
And the catalyst for this was oil, right?
Oil was the blood supply for the parasite. Billions of dollars flowed into the country. But because the government had this free money coming from the ground, they didn't need to tax the people.
And if you don't need to tax...
You don't need to listen to them. You don't need their permission to govern. You just need to control the oil tap.
Right. And Nyaba gives a really stark visual example of this disconnect. He points to the capital city, Juba.
Yes, this part really struck me. Juba is the seat of power. It's where the oil deals are signed.
And yet, Nyaba points out, the city lacks basic infrastructure. We're talking about a capital city of an oil-rich nation.
That does not have a reliable piped water system or a functioning electric grid.
That is just mind-blowing when you think about it. You have ministers driving brand-new, air-conditioned luxury SUVs, costing maybe $100,000, past citizens who are buying dirty water from a truck because the government hasn't laid a single pipe.
It perfectly illustrates the parasitic nature he's talking about. If the goal is development, you'd see water pipes and power lines. But if the goal is personal enrichment, you see luxury cars, big walled compounds, and foreign bank accounts.
The priorities are completely detached from the people.
Completely.
But here's what I always struggle with in these scenarios. How do they get away with it? If I'm living in Juba and I see the minister's new car while I have no water, why isn't there a revolution every Tuesday?
That is where the deformation of political thought gets really sophisticated. Nyaba argues this parasitic class has a very specific mechanism of control.
Which is?
They use tribalism.
But wait, you just said they don't actually care about their people. They're letting them drink dirty water. So how does tribalism work if you aren't actually helping the tribe?
It's the ultimate con. The leaders go back to their ethnic groups and they say, look, I am the only thing standing between you and them being the other tribe. They say, I am in power to protect you. If I lose my position, those other people will come and take your land, take your cows, and kill you.
I see. So they frame their personal corruption as protection for their ethnic group.
Yeah.
I need to be rich and powerful so I can defend you.
Exactly. It weaponizes fear. The average person in that tribe isn't seeing the benefits of the oil money. They're still poor.
Yeah.
But they support the leader because they are terrified of the alternative. It creates a shield of ethnic loyalty around criminal behavior.
It effectively turns the population into hostages of their own identity.
And it destroys the institutions of the state. Nyaba points out that formal institutions like the parliament or the cabinet, they stopped being the engines of decision-making.
They became empty shells.
Totally. The actual power shifted to informal ethnic networks. He specifically points to the Council of Elders of the Dinka as an example. In Nyaba's analysis, this was an unelected body serving private interests that held the real sway.
So the state is just a performance. The real decisions are being made by ethnic brokers in back rooms.
Precisely. And this leads to a situation where political solutions that look good on paper become totally meaningless.
Which brings us to the next big topic, federalism. I feel like every time I read a report on South Sudan, the word federalism is everywhere.
It's the buzzword. And on the surface, it makes sense, right? South Sudan is huge, it's diverse, why not give regions more autonomy?
It works in other places, but Nyaba isn't buying it.
No. He throws a total curveball here. He argues that under the current totalitarian system, federalism is a fake magical solution. He actually calls it a trick.
A trick? How can giving people local control be a trick?
Because of who is drawing the lines and why? Nyaba argues that the ruling class pushes for creating more and more states, splitting the country into tinier pieces, not to empower people.
But to fragment them.
To fragment them. Think about it. If you carve the country up into tiny little ethnic enclaves, the people become too divided to unite against the central looting authority in Juba.
You keep them busy fighting over local borders and resources.
Exactly. They never look up and see who's stealing the big money in the capital. It's divide and rule, just modernized.
That is incredibly cynical, using the language of democracy to tighten authoritarian control.
And this connects to another profound concept Nyaba talks about, the permanent transition.
This part really stuck with me. The idea that the country is just stuck in a waiting room.
Nyaba argues that South Sudan and Sudan, before it, has been stuck in a state of transition since 1956. They are always transitioning to democracy, to peace, to a new constitution.
It's like a software update that freezes at 99%.
And the freeze is intentional. The waiting room is profitable for the people in charge. As long as you're in transition, you have an excuse for not having real elections, an excuse for martial law.
An excuse for no accountability. Oh, we can't look at the books right now. We're in a transition.
Yes. And this explains why the peace agreements never seem to hold. Nyaba drops a pretty damning statistic about the 2015 peace agreement.
What was it?
That agreement took massive international effort, millions of dollars spent, and it collapsed in just 3 months.
3 months? You can't even build a house in 3 months, let alone a peace process.
And Nyaba says this wasn't an accident. It collapsed because it wasn't designed to solve the root problem, the deformation of thought. It was just a power-sharing deal.
The elites sitting around a table deciding how to divvy up the cake again.
You get the Ministry of Finance, I get the Ministry of Defense, and the moment one side feels they aren't getting enough, they flip the table and the shooting starts again. The agreements are just pause buttons.
So let's recap. We've diagnosed a terminal illness here. The army is flawed, the economy is parasitic, the political system is a mirage. It feels hopeless. Does Nyaba offer a way out?
He does. But we need to be very careful with the words he uses. He calls for a national democratic revolution.
Whoa, revolution. That sounds violent. And given everything we've just discussed, violence seems to be the one thing South Sudan has had far too much of.
Right. And that is the crucial distinction. Nyaba is not calling for storming the palace. He's not calling for a military coup or more bloodshed. When he says revolution, he's using it in a socioeconomic sense.
Okay, strip away the academic language. What does he actually mean?
He says the country needs to transform its productive forces.
What do you mean?
It means shifting the entire basis of society from extracting to producing. Right now, the quick way to get rich is to capture the state and steal oil money. Nyaba says the country needs to develop agriculture, industry, services, real businesses.
So growing food, making products, selling services.
Exactly. And think about the psychology of it. A factory owner hates war. A farmer hates war. War burns your crops and destroys your factory.
But a looter loves war. It's cover.
So he wants to create a class of people that has a financial vested interest in peace. You have to change the material conditions. You cannot have a peaceful democracy if your entire economy is based on poverty and dependency.
But, and there's always a massive but here, who is going to lead this? Because the current guys, the parasites, they aren't going to operate on themselves.
That is the hardest pill to swallow in Nyaba's analysis, and he is incredibly harsh on his own peers here. He suggests, and this is a quote, that war leaders are not good leaders for peace.
That is a powerful statement, especially because, like we said at the start, these men are viewed as the founding fathers, the heroes of the liberation.
They are, but structurally, Nyaba argues they're unfit for the new task. Think about the skills required to fight a guerrilla war in the bush for 20 years.
Secrecy, paranoia, absolute command, ruthlessness.
Exactly, and the skills to build a democracy.
Transparency, compromise, dialogue, institution building.
Losing an argument without shooting the other person.
It's the exact opposite skill set. It's like trying to use a sledgehammer to perform eye surgery, isn't it?
Exactly. Nyaba is arguing that the deformation of thought is inherent in the men who led the war. They can't just learn to be Democrats overnight. Their entire worldview was coded in the bush in a context of survival.
So if the current leadership is structurally incapable of fixing the problem, where does that leave the people of South Sudan?
It leaves them with the difficult task of a generational shift. Nyaba's analysis implies this cycle won't be broken by another peace treaty signed by the same men in the same luxury hotels. It requires a new consciousness.
A mental revolution before a political one.
Yes, it requires a generation that rejects tribalism not just in words but in practice. A generation that demands a productive economy rather than a state that just hands out oil money.
It's a call to reset the country's DNA.
Which is perhaps the hardest thing a nation can do. But Nyaba's point is that without that reset, everything else is just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with the paradox of a liberation movement that didn't liberate the minds of its soldiers.
Then we looked at how that evolved into parasitic capitalism, where leaders feed off the state while Juba goes without water.
And we saw how political solutions like federalism and peace treaties are often used as smoke and mirrors to maintain a permanent transition. It is a heavy diagnosis.
Right.
The crisis in South Sudan isn't about a lack of oil or land or resources. As Dr. Nyaba puts it, it's about the deformation of political thought.
It's a crisis of the mind and the soul of the nation, not just its bank account.
Which brings us to the question we want to leave you with today. And it's a tough one, relevant not just for South Sudan, but for any nation trying to rebuild after conflict.
If Dr. Nyaba is right, and the very people who built the nation are structurally, psychologically incapable of governing it, how do you transition power without tearing the house down again?
Is it possible to retrofit a national identity onto a system that was built from day one on division? That is the challenge.
Indeed.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the work of Dr. Peter Adok Nyaba. It's a tough topic, but understanding the why is the first step towards seeing the how of a solution. We'll catch you on the next one. Stay curious.